Okay, let's dive in. We've got, a pretty fascinating stack of sources here. We're going to be exploring some of the world's really ancient spiritual and philosophical traditions,
It's quite the journey we're embarking on. These sources, they cover incredible ground, from the foundations of Eastern thought in India and China.
all the way to the roots of Western wisdom in Greece, and then these unique perspectives from Egypt, the Nile Valley.
Exactly. And they don't stop there. They also bring in the profound oral traditions of indigenous peoples. We'll be looking specifically at Australia and the Americas.
Yeah, it's a truly global scope, isn't it?
It really is. So our mission today, if you like, is to sort of navigate this material together. We want to pull out the essential insights, those nuggets of knowledge.
Right. The things that give us a real shortcut to understanding these foundational ideas. Ideas that, well, still resonate today.
That's the goal. It's not just about, listing beliefs. It's about understanding why these ideas came about, why they mattered back then.
And how they actually continue to shape our world, maybe in ways we don't always realize. So, okay, where do we even begin with all this?
Let's start in the East. I think India is the place to begin with its incredible depth. It really created this foundational spiritual and cultural matrix, largely built around the Vedic texts, the Vedas.
Okay, the Vedas. Our sources really emphasize their authority. They're called Shruti, meaning what is heard, believed to be divinely revealed, eternal truth seen by these ancient sages, the rishis. What does that idea of divinely heard truth really imply?
Well, it gives them supreme authority, doesn't it? Especially in those orthodox Brahmanical schools. It elevates them beyond just human wisdom. It's seen as something eternal, revealed, not just thought up.
And the fact that this huge body of knowledge was kept alive for like millennia just through oral transmission, that's kind of mind-boggling. The sources talk about meticulous precision.
Oh, it's astonishing. And it wasn't just about remembering the words. The power, they believed, was in the exact sound, the pronunciation of the mantras.
The sound itself.
Yes. Think about brahmacharya. It wasn't only ascetic discipline, it was also this incredibly rigorous training focused on perfect memorization, perfect recitation of entire Vedas, generation after generation, to keep that purity, that power intact.
Wow. So the sound itself had a kind of spiritual weight to it. That's a powerful idea. The structure of the Vedas is interesting too. The mantra, the hymns, and the Brahmana, the ritual explanations, both are Shruti.
Both considered Juti, yes.
Yeah.
And then you have the appendices, the Aranyakas, and crucially, the Upanishads. These Upanishads, they're where the later, more philosophical layers really develop. They signal a major turning point.
And that turning point is the shift from, say, early Vedic polytheism towards something much more philosophical.
Exactly. Early Vedism, it was centered on this polytheistic system,
Yeah.
focused on sacrifice, the Ajnana. You had deities like Agni, Indra, Surya, powerful forces often tied to nature.
And worshippers were looking for tangible benefits, right? Like cattle, sons.
Right. Material blessings, cattle, sons, long life, sought through careful ritual action. Agni, the fire god, was crucial as the intermediary, carrying those offerings up to the other gods.
But the Upanishads, they represent this profound turn inward. How does that actually manifest?
It shifts the focus quite dramatically towards abstract concepts, often monistic ones. This is where we really see the emergence of Brahman,
Brahman, the ultimate reality.
the ultimate impersonal, all-pervading reality, the very ground of existence itself.
And the individual self, the Atman.
Yes, the individual, eternal self. And the core philosophical quest becomes realizing their fundamental identity. Atman is Brahman.
So the self is the ultimate reality.
Deep down, yes. And this isn't just philosophy. It's a massive internalization of the spiritual focus. You move from trying to appease external gods to realizing the divine that's already within you.
This tradition also seems to lay down some really foundational ethical ideas like uta, dharma, and karma.
Yes, Uta is the earliest one we see. It's the cosmic order, the natural law governing everything, the universe and human actions. It's the basis for how things should be, the principle of harmony.
And dharma flows from uta. Our sources call it one of the most crucial Indian concepts.
It does flow from Uta. Dharma covers your religious duties, your social responsibilities, the moral principles that align with that cosmic order. It's basically a guide for righteous conduct, tailored to your place in life. The Dharma Shastra texts later codified all this in detail.
Okay. And karma, its meaning seems to evolve quite a bit.
It really does. It starts, rooted in the efficacy of ritual action, the yajna, does the ritual work. But it transforms into this universal law of moral cause and effect.
So your actions have consequences.
Actions, thoughts, words, they all have consequences that determine your future destiny. And this is intricately linked to the cycle of rebirth, samsara, and the ultimate goal of liberation, moksha.
So ritual was absolutely central early on Yajayana, the fire sacrifice.
It was a primary way humans interacted with the divine. Offerings, havir, placed into the sacred fire carried by Agni. And these rituals could range wildly.
From simple household ones to huge state ceremonies.
Exactly. Simple domestic ones like Agnihotra, right up to massive, complex public rituals performed by kings, things like the Rajasuya for royal consecration, or the really elaborate horse sacrifice, the Ashvamedha. The sources even allude to a symbolic human sacrifice, the Purushamedha.
And this mention of soma, this plant-based drink, what was its role?
Soma. It was believed to grant inspiration, maybe even a direct connection with the divine. It's particularly associated with rituals in the Samaveda, a way to perhaps directly experience the sacred.
The increasing complexity of all these rituals,
Right.
it sounds like it would definitely empower the Brahmin priests.
Oh, absolutely. They became indispensable. They were the custodians of the precise oral knowledge needed to perform the yajna correctly. Without them, the ritual wouldn't work, or worse. Well, the fear was that an incorrectly performed ritual could bring disaster. So, the Brahmins were the necessary intermediaries, holding this exclusive knowledge. That cemented their position at the top of the social hierarchy.
So how does this really intricate Vedic system then transition into what we might think of as Hinduism today? It's not a straight line, is it?
No, not a simple one-to-one connection. Early Vedic ideas about the afterlife, for instance, they were quite different from the later focus on samsara and moksha. That late Vedic period, maybe 1100 to 500 BCE, especially with the Brahmanas and then the Upanishads, that was the crucial turning point.
Right, this is where you see those two directions you mentioned. On one hand, even more elaborate external rituals.
And on the other, that profound philosophical turn inward.
Okay.
The Upanishads really represent the peak of that inward turn. They start questioning the ultimate effectiveness of external sacrifice alone. The spiritual goal shifts to realizing that identity of Atan and Brahman.
The self and the ultimate reality.
Exactly. This pursuit of knowledge, jhana, and liberation, moksha, it doesn't just lay the foundation for classical Hinduism. It also created the philosophical climate, the vocabulary, that allowed other major religions to emerge in India.
That sounds like the paradigm shift our sources talked about. Moving from power residing in external things, the fire, the priest, the chant,
To power found internally, in consciousness, in self-knowledge, in ethical living, yes. The early system was, you could say, somewhat transactional. Perform the ritual correctly, get the material reward.
like the cattle and sons.
Right. But the Upanishads started reinterpreting these rituals symbolically. The focus became the inner quest. The ultimate sacrifice in this view is offering your own ego, your ignorance, into the fire of knowledge, jhana. This philosophical groundwork is really key to understanding the Shramana movements that came next.
And the influence of this whole Vedic complex goes way beyond just religious practices, doesn't it? The sources describe it as a broader cultural matrix.
Oh, completely. Vedic texts influenced law, dharmashastra, social structure, varna. Even medicine Ayurveda has roots in the Atharva Veda. Political ceremonies drew on Vedic precedents. Sanskrit became the classical language, influencing later languages like Pali and Prakrit used in Buddhist and Jain texts.
So even traditions that rejected the Vedas still had to engage with them.
They did. They often used Vedic concepts, even while offering very different paths or solutions. It's both a specific historical religion and this pervasive cultural foundation that shapes so much of Indian civilization.
So thinking about that shift from appeasing external gods to realizing the divine within, what really stands out to you about that sheer reliance on oral tradition for preserving all this complex thought for so long?
It's almost hard for us to grasp today, isn't it? Knowledge systems that depend so utterly on the human voice, on memory, stretching over thousands of years. It must have imbued the spoken word, the precise recitation, with an almost physical weight, a sacredness.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that philosophical introspection we see building in the Upanishads, it really seems to set the stage for other responses to the human condition in India. Let's look at those Shramana countercurrents traditions like Buddhism and Jainism.
Right, these movements arose, well, somewhat parallel to that later Vedic period, roughly 8th to 5th centuries BCE. The word Sramana itself means seeker, or one who strives. And they were definitely distinct from the mainstream Vedic tradition.
And their defining feature seems to be rejecting Vedic authority, rejecting the Brahmin priesthood, focusing instead on personal effort, asceticism, direct experience. all for liberation.
Precisely that. They offered alternative paths to that goal of moksha, or liberation. Buddhism and Jainism are, of course, the most prominent examples that have survived and thrived.
Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, around the 5th century BCE, he fits this description perfectly, right? A prince who became a shramana.
Yes, he embarked on this intense personal quest to find a solution to suffering, dukkha. And crucially, as a shramana, he rejected the authority of the Vedas and the Brahmins. He found his own path through ascetic practices, meditation, leading ultimately to his enlightenment.
Becoming the Buddha, the awakened one. And the core of his teaching, the absolute bedrock for all Buddhist schools, is the Four Noble Truths.
That's right. The first is the truth of suffering, dukkha. The basic acknowledgement that life fundamentally involves suffering, dissatisfaction, impermanence. It's not just obvious pain, but also the subtle suffering of change and attachment.
Okay.
Then the second.
The truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya. This identifies the cause, which is craving, thirst, or attachment. Craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, even craving for non-existence, all rooted in those fundamental defilements: greed, hatred, and ignorance.
Then the third truth offers hope. The truth of cessation, nirodha. Suffering can end.
Yes, by eliminating that craving, that attachment, suffering ceases. And finally, the way to do it. The truth of the path, magga. The Noble Eightfold Path.
Which is this very practical, ethical, and meditative framework. It includes right view, right resolve, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, or samadhi. They're all interconnected, not sequential steps.
And the ultimate goal of following this path is nirvana.
Nirvana, often translated as blowing out or quenching. Like extinguishing the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. It signifies the final release from the cycle of birth and death, samsara.
Okay, then Jainism is the other major Sramana tradition we need to look at. It traces a lineage through figures called Tirthankaras, with Mahavira being the one contemporary to the Buddha who really revitalized it.
That's right. Jainism is built on three fundamental pillars, sometimes called the three jewels, though the core principles are often summarized as ahimsa, nonviolence, aparigraha, non-attachment, and anekantavada, many-sided reality.
Ahimsa seems particularly central and incredibly rigorous in Jainism.
It's the absolute cornerstone, the highest ethical duty. It demands this meticulous commitment to nonviolence in thought, word, and deed toward all living beings, jiva, even microscopic ones.
Which explains their strict vegetarianism or often veganism.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing harm. Jain monastics take 5 great vows, the Mahavratas, which include absolute ahimsa, truthfulness, sakya, non-stealing asteya, celibacy, brahmacharya, and non-possession, non-attachment, aparigraha. Lay followers have less stringent versions, the anuvratas.
Their cosmology is also quite different, isn't it? No creator god.
Correct. They see the universe as eternal, uncreated. Reality is composed of 6 eternal substances, primarily soul, jiva, and matter, budgala. And their concept of karma is fascinating.
How so?
They view karma not just as a principle of cause and effect, but as actual subtle physical particles, karmic matter, that are attracted to the soul by our actions and passions. This matter clings to the soul, weighing it down and binding it to the cycle of rebirth.
So the goal moksha is about physically purifying the soul of this karmic matter.
Essentially, yes. It's a process of shedding that accumulated karmic matter through strict ethical conduct, asceticism, and meditation, allowing the soul to rise to a state of liberation and eternal bliss.
Now, both Buddhism and Jainism seem to have adopted concepts like samsara, karma, and moksha, which were, as you said, developing in that later Vedic Upanishadic period. But their break from Vedic authority was absolutely crucial.
Defining. It was a categorical rejection of the religious authority of the Vedas and the rituals performed by Brahmin priests. Animal sacrifice, common in Vedic rites, was completely incompatible with their emphasis on nonviolence.
And they challenged the caste system, the varna.
Fundamentally, the Buddhist monastic community, the Sangha, and the Jain path were explicitly open to people from all classes. Spiritual attainment was seen as purely a result of personal effort and virtue, not your birthright.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And they fundamentally transformed the understanding of karma. It shifted from being about the efficacy of ritual action, as in the Vedas, to being almost entirely about ethical action and, importantly, moral intention, sadhana. Your intention became the primary factor determining the karmic consequences.
Buddhist-dependent origination is a good example of that developed ethical psychology,
A
right?
very sophisticated example, yes. And while the mainstream Vedic tradition valued the householder stage of life, the Grihastha ashrama, the Sramanas, really championed renunciation, sannyasa, and asceticism as the most direct, even necessary path to liberation.
Looking at their histories, Buddhism obviously became a major world religion. Patronage from figures like Ashoka the Great seems key.
Absolutely. Ashoka, the Maurya emperor in the 3rd century BCE, effectively made Buddhism a state religion. He sponsored monasteries, sent out missionaries. That was crucial for its spread across Asia
I
and the eventual development of diverse schools like Theravada, Mahayana, with its bodhisattva ideal, and Vajrayana.
Jainism also got royal patronage. Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka's grandfather, is traditionally said to have become a Jain monk, but it remained mostly rooted in India.
Yes, it maintained a continuous, though geographically less widespread, influence. Jainism did have a significant schism early on, around the 3rd century BCE, leading to the Digambara, sky-clad, meaning monks practiced nudity, and Svetambara, white-clad sects.
And they have some differences in practice and doctrine.
They do. For example, the Digambara traditionally believe women cannot achieve liberation in a female body and must be reborn as a man first, while Svetambara Jains disagree. But despite these divisions, Jainism has remained an enduring force within India, very influential in commerce, ethics, and philosophy.
These Sramana movements, they really represent a radical shift, don't they? From what seems like a more tribal or ritual-based morality in early Vedism.
To a much more universal, ethics-based spirituality, yes. The early Vedic system was quite tied to specific Aryan tribes, priests, patrons, the whole Varna hierarchy. The Sramanas broke that exclusivity wide open.
The Sangha was open to all castes.
Ahimsa applied universally to all sentient beings, not just certain groups. The core teachings, whether the Four Noble Truths or the Five Great Vows, were presented as universal laws. They apply to any individual, regardless of birth or status, because they address universal suffering and offer a path achievable through personal effort. This universalism was absolutely critical to Buddhism's ability to spread far beyond India.
And yet, even in their rejection of Vedic authority, they seem to have been profoundly shaped by it.
Oh, inevitably. They're often termed Gnostica traditions, meaning they reject Vedic authority. But the philosophical language they used, many of the core problems they tackled, samsara, karma, moksha, even concepts like dharma or ahimsa, these were all part of the intellectual and spiritual landscape shaped by the Vedas and Upanishads.
So they reinterpreted these concepts.
Exactly. They reinterpreted them, often gave them different emphasis, and proposed radically different solutions. They generally accepted the diagnosis that existence involves suffering or bondage to rebirth, but they rejected the Vedic ritual cure, offering ethical conduct and meditative discipline instead. In a way, the Vedic tradition set the terms of the debate that these new movements were responding to, even as they critiqued it.
It's really fascinating how they took that philosophical introspection from the Upanishads and just ran with it, building entirely new systems. What strikes you most about their emphasis on personal effort and that idea of universal spiritual potential?
I think it's the sheer audacity, maybe, saying that liberation, the highest spiritual attainment, is available to anyone regardless of their social standing, their birth, their background, purely through their own efforts, their own ethical conduct, their own mental discipline. It's such a powerful declaration of human potential and, I suppose, human responsibility.
Okay, leaving India for now, let's shift our focus further east to ancient China. We have its two defining philosophical pillars, Confucianism and Taoism.
Right. These two great traditions emerged during times of really intense social and political turmoil, the Spring and Autumn period, the Warring States period. They offered distinct, but often seen as complementary, visions for how to live a good life, how to create order.
Confucianism focusing more on social harmony, the human realm.
Yes, harmony in the human social sphere, while Taoism sought harmony with the natural cosmic world. And later, of course, Buddhism arrived from India and joined them, eventually forming what's known as the Three Teachings, Sanjiao, which deeply shaped Chinese culture.
So Confucianism, based on the teachings of Master Kong, Confucius, he saw himself not as an innovator, but as transmitting older values.
He did. He looked back to the earlier Zhou dynasty as a kind of golden age and saw himself as transmitting its values to restore order in his own chaotic times. His core project was really about learning to be human, cultivating virtue, understanding propriety, all in service of creating a just and harmonious world. It's fundamentally a philosophy of ethics, governance, and social interaction.
And his core virtues, our sources list Ren, Yis, Z's, Z, benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, trustworthiness.
Ren is arguably the most central. It's often translated as benevolence, humaneness, or even co-humanity. It's the ideal quality of relationship between people, seen as the source from which all other virtues flow.
A crucial practice in Confucianism is LEA, ritual propriety, but it seems much broader than just formal ceremonies.
Oh, much broader. Elian isn't just about state rituals or ancestor veneration, though it includes those. It encompasses the whole spectrum of social interaction, the proper protocols, courtesies, manners, even seemingly mundane behaviors. It's the structure that enables civilized behavior.
How so?
While practicing LEA is seen as a way to cultivate self-discipline, express respect for others in their specific roles, and ultimately maintain social harmony. It gives shape to relationships.
And Confucian ethics are deeply relational, emphasizing one's place in a network of roles and obligations. The 5 relationships are key here, and especially show filial piety.
Filial piety, respect and devotion to one's parents and ancestors, is absolutely paramount in Confucianism. It's not just a family value, it's considered the very root of all other virtues and the foundation for a stable society. The idea is that a well-ordered family serves as the model for a well-ordered state.
And Confucius's teachings were compiled by his disciples in the Analects.
Primarily, yes, along with the 5 classics, which Confucius is said to have edited or commented on, like the I Ching Book of Changes.
Okay. Then you have Taoism, often attributed to the legendary Lao Tzu, maybe 6th century BCE. This seems to turn away from the social structure towards nature, the cosmos.
Yes, its central concept is the Tao, usually translated as the way. It's described as this mysterious, ultimately unknowable, spontaneous force that generates and orders the entire universe. It's the ultimate reality, but it defies definition.
The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao.
Exactly, the famous opening of the Tao Te Ching. The goal for the individual, then, is to live in harmony with this cosmic flow, this Tao.
And the key practice for doing that is wu wei, non-action or effortless action.
And it's really important not to misunderstand Wu Wei as just being passive or doing nothing. That's not quite it. It means acting in a way that is spontaneous, natural, perfectly aligned with the flow of the Tao, like water moving effortlessly around obstacles, rather than trying to force your own will against the natural current of things.
Their cosmology involves that dynamic interplay of yin and yang.
Yes, the feminine, passive, receptive, dark principle.
Yeah.
And the masculine, active, assertive, bright principle. Yang. They're seen as complementary opposites, not good versus evil. Their constant dynamic interaction gives rise to all phenomena in the universe. The focus is on balance and harmony between them. Both are essential.
Key texts here are the Tao Te Ching itself and the writings attributed to Zhuangzi, and the ethics tend to emphasize things like simplicity, spontaneity,
Frugality, humility qualities that are seen as reflecting the natural, unforced, unpretentious nature of the Tao itself.
So these 2 traditions, Confucianism and Taoism, along with the later arrival of Buddhism, they form the Sanjiao, the 3 teachings, and they became really deeply integrated in Chinese culture.
Very much so. Over centuries, they became intertwined not just with each other, but also with Chinese folk religion. They mutually influenced and blended together. For most Chinese people historically, and even today to some extent, there wasn't necessarily a rigid boundary. You could draw from all 3 depending on the context.
It's often simplified, maybe oversimplified, as Confucianism for social and public life, family, state duties.
And Taoism more for private life, the spiritual quest, finding meaning, connecting with nature.
And Buddhism contributing perhaps perspectives on monasticism, deeper psychology, ideas about the afterlife.
Right. And you see this syncretism very clearly in practice. For example, Confucian filial piety, honoring ancestors, gets integrated into Buddhist and Taoist festivals like the Zongkyuan or Ghost Festival.
Their different visions also played out in their ideas about ideal governance and the role of the individual.
Definitely. Confucianism idealizes a ruler who governs not primarily by laws and punishments, but by their own moral virtue, their day, and by the correct application of Elan. The idea is that a benevolent, virtuous ruler inspires order naturally in the populace.
And the individual's goal.
To become a junzi, often translated as gentleman or exemplary person, someone who cultivates virtue, fulfills their social roles properly, and contributes to the harmony of their family and the state.
Taoism, on the other hand, seems to prefer a ruler who practices wu wei.
Exactly. The ideal Taoist ruler interferes as little as possible, allows things to take their natural course. There's a sense that excessive government, too much regulation, can become oppressive and counterproductive, actually creating disorder.
So for the individual in Taoism, the focus is less on social roles and more on.
More on achieving harmony with the Tao, finding inner peace, maybe cultivating practices for physical health and spiritual longevity, even immortality in some later developments.
This creates a kind of complementary tension, maybe, in Chinese thought. Structure versus spontaneity.
That's a good way to put it. Confucianism provides the necessary framework, the structure for social order. Defined roles, ethical guidelines like Ren and Xiao, the rituals of LDA. It's like the grammar for human interaction, focused on the human-made world.
Whereas
Taoism urges you to step outside those potentially artificial constructs, to align yourself with the natural, spontaneous flow of the Tao. It's often implicitly, sometimes explicitly, critical of rigid Confucian rules and conventions, seeing them as potentially stifling.
but they're often seen not as mutually exclusive enemies, but as covering different necessary domains of a complete life.
Yes, forming what some call a harmonious aggregate. The idea is you might be Confucian in fulfilling your public duties and social interactions, but Taoist in your private search for meaning, your connection with nature, or finding inner peace away from social pressures. A truly flourishing life, in this view, requires both the security of social order and the space for individual expression and connection to the cosmos.
Like Confucianism provides the container and Taoism the vital flowing content within.
That's a nice analogy, yeah.
And they developed into more formal religious traditions in quite distinct ways too.
They did. What we call religious Taoism, or Daojia, emerged around the 2nd century CE. It became a much more organized religion with a pantheon of deities, often including Lao Tzu himself, elaborate rituals, ancestor worship, a priesthood, temples. Many practices focused on cultivating vital energy, kie, and achieving physical or spiritual immortality. It has a strong liturgical tradition.
And Confucianism. Is it even a religion in the same sense? Sometimes it's called a civil religion.
That term captures something important. Confucian rituals are very much human-centered. They're about cultivating civilized behavior, reinforcing social ethics, honoring ancestors and sages like Confucius himself. While it acknowledges a higher power, Tian, or heaven, often seen as a source of moral order, it doesn't typically have a formal priesthood or a pantheon of gods in the same way Taoism developed.
Its temples are more like halls of honor.
Exactly, honoring Confucius and other sages. You could say the transcendence in Confucianism is found less in an otherworldly realm and more in the potential for moral perfection within human relationships and society, right here on Earth.
Okay, thinking about them together. How do Confucianism and Taoism, despite their obvious differences, maybe offer a more complete vision of life when viewed side by side? And what surprises you, perhaps, about concepts like effortless action, Wu Wei, or the profound importance placed on something like ritual propriety in Confucianism?
Well, they're quite counterintuitive from many modern Western perspectives, aren't they? The idea that not striving but aligning with a natural flow is actually the path to effectiveness. Or that something seemingly external and formal, like ritual, El Bran, could be a primary means of internal self-cultivation and creating social order. These definitely challenge our common assumptions about action, authenticity, and where social cohesion comes from.
Okay, from the East, let's shift our focus now, westward and also south, to the foundations of wisdom in the West and the Nile Valley. Let's start with ancient Greece. Here, the focus really seems to shift towards rational inquiry, systematic thought.
Yes, ancient Greece gave rise to philosophical traditions like Platonism and Stoicism, which were incredibly influential. They sought to understand the cosmos, the nature of the soul, and what constitutes a virtuous life, primarily through the power of reason, logos.
And especially in the Hellenistic period, after Alexander the Great, when things were pretty chaotic, philosophy became a practical guide.
Very much so. In a world that felt unstable and unpredictable, philosophy offered pathways for individuals to achieve eudaimonia, often translated as human flourishing or living well amidst the chaos. Platonism and Stoicism offered comprehensive worldviews, but quite different paths to that flourishing.
So Platonism, stemming from Plato himself around the 4th century BCE, often called a cornerstone of Western thought.
Absolutely. Its central metaphysical doctrine, the one everyone learns about, is the theory of forms or ideas. It proposes this fundamental dualism.
Dualism between
Between the sensible world we perceive with our senses, which Plato saw as transient, imperfect, always changing, and a higher intelligible realm of forms. These forms are eternal, perfect, unchanging archetypes. like the form of beauty itself, or justice, or equality.
And the form of the good is at the very top of this hierarchy.
Yes, the form of the good is the ultimate principle. It's the source of all the other forms and ultimately the source of all reality, truth, and genuine knowledge. For Plato, true knowledge, episteme, isn't gained through our unreliable senses, which only perceive fleeting reflections or shadows of the forms.
So how do we gain it?
Through the soul's activity. Through reason, through philosophical dialectic that back and forth questioning the soul can gradually come to apprehend, to contemplate these perfect eternal forms directly.
He also had that famous theory of the soul, the tripartite soul.
Right. The soul, the psyche, he argued, has three parts. There's the rational part, the lexicon, located in the head, which naturally seeks truth and should govern. Then the spirited part, thymoides, in the chest, associated with emotions like honor, courage, anger. And finally, the appetitive part, epithemicon, in the gut, driven by physical desires for food, drink, sex.
And a just, healthy soul is one where reason rules.
Exactly. When the rational part, guided by wisdom, rules the spirited and appetitive parts, keeping them in check and working in harmony, then the soul is just and balanced. His ideas are explored, of course, in his famous dialogues like the Republic, Phaedo, Symposium, Timaeus, often featuring his teacher Socrates as the main figure.
Okay, then Stoicism. Another major school, emerging a bit later, founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE.
The Stoics saw philosophy not just as abstract speculation, but as a way of life, a unified, interconnected system comprising logic, physics, and ethics.
Logic, physics, ethics. How did they fit together?
Well, logic was the tool for correct reasoning, for understanding the world clearly, distinguishing truth from falsehood. Physics, for the Stoics, included theology. It was the study of the nature of the universe and the divine principle governing it. And ethics, the art of living a good life, was seen as flowing directly from a correct understanding provided by logic and physics.
And their physics sounds quite different from Plato's realm of forms, more material.
Very different. Yes, the Stoics were fundamentally monists, believing in one underlying reality, and materialists. They saw the universe as a single, rational, interconnected organism, a living whole, governed by logos.
Logos, that's a key term.
It is. It means reason or word or divine principle. The Stoics also referred to it as God, Zeus, fate, or nature. It's not a transcendent creator separate from the world like in some traditions. It's an immanent, active, intelligent force, a sort of divine fire or breath, the pneuma, that permeates and orders the entire cosmos according to a rational plan.
So physics is theology in a sense. Understanding the universe is understanding God or logos.
Precisely. And this understanding is the prerequisite for ethics. Because the core ethical principle for Stoicism is living in agreement with nature.
Which means?
It means aligning your individual reason, your own fragment of the universal logos, with the rational order of the cosmos itself. Living virtuously is living rationally, living according to nature's design.
And the core ethical teaching here is really radical, isn't it? That virtue is the only good.
Yes, that's the stark central claim. Virtue, things like wisdom, justice, courage, moderation, is the sole good. Everything else, all those external things we usually worry about, health, wealth, reputation, pain, pleasure, even life and death are considered morally indifferent. Diaphora.
Indifferent. Even health or pain.
Morally indifferent. They might be naturally preferable, like health, or dispreferable, like pain, but they don't inherently add to or subtract from your happiness or your moral worth. True happiness, eudaimonia, and suffering reside entirely within your control specifically, in your judgments, your interpretations, your state of mind.
So the goal is apatheia.
Apatheia, which doesn't mean apathy in our modern sense of not caring. It means inner peace, tranquility, equanimity, freedom from disturbing passions and irrational emotions like fear, grief, excessive desire. It comes from accepting what you cannot change, external events dictated by the logos or fate, and focusing all your energy on what you can control. Your character, your choices, your judgments.
Key figures develop these ideas over centuries, right? Zeno, Chrysippus, and then the later Roman Stoics.
Yes, the Roman Stoics are particularly famous because their writings survived and offer such practical advice. People like Seneca, the former slave Epictetus, and perhaps most famously the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose private notebooks, the Meditations, are a profound record of trying to live Stoicism day by day.
So both Platonism and Stoicism aimed at eudaimonia, human flourishing, but they proposed really different paths to get there.
Very different. For the Platonist, the path is fundamentally a philosophical and spiritual ascent. It's a life dedicated to reason, to gaining knowledge of those eternal, unchanging forms. Virtue is seen largely as knowledge. If you truly know the good, you will act accordingly. Happiness comes from achieving inner harmony in the soul, mirroring the perfect order of the forms.
And the soul's ultimate purpose.
Is to purify itself from the distractions and limitations of the body and the sensible world, ultimately to escape the cycle of reincarnation Plato also believed in, and return to its true home in the eternal realm of the forms. It's a transcendent goal.
The Stoic path sounds much more grounded in this world, focused on navigating life as it is.
It absolutely is. The path is living in agreement with nature, aligning with the rational logos that operates within the cosmos. Since virtue is the sole good, happiness comes entirely from within, from achieving that state of inner peace, apatheia, by accepting external circumstances as indifferent and focusing solely on making virtuous choices, on perfecting your own moral character.
And both traditions had a massive, enduring legacy on Western thought, didn't they? Platonism evolved.
It did, through phases like the skepticism of the Middle Academy, then Middle Platonism, which started blending Platonic ideas with others, and eventually culminating in Neoplatonism, particularly with Platonists in the 3rd century CE.
Neoplatonism introduced concepts like the One as the ultimate source.
Yes, the ineffable one, from which reality emanates in stages. Neoplatonism emphasized mystical experience, the soul's potential ascent back to union with the One. And this form of Platonism had a profound, absolutely formative influence on early Christian theology.
How so?
Thinkers like Philo of Alexandria, Origen, and especially St. Augustine drew heavily on Platonic and Neoplatonic concepts to articulate Christian doctrines, understanding God's transcendence and immateriality, the immortality of the soul, interpreting Christ as the Logos, even seeing the forms as ideas existing in the mind of God.
And Stoicism also left its mark. Concepts like natural law, the idea of conscience.
Yes, concepts like universal natural law rooted in the Logos, the idea of synodesis or conscience, these resonated and found their way into Christian thought as well. You can see traces in figures like St. Paul and other early church fathers. The intellectual atmosphere of the Greco-Roman world that Christianity grew up in was just saturated with these philosophical ideas.
Our sources frame these philosophies in part as responses to periods of intense instability. That seems important.
It's a really key perspective for understanding their motivation. Plato was writing after the devastating Peloponnesian War, the execution of his teacher Socrates, the decline of Athenian democracy. His response, in works like The Republic, was to try and design an ideal state, grounded in those unchanging, eternal forms, a political structure that would be immune to the chaos and corruption he saw around him.
So a macro-metaphysical solution. Fix the state with eternal truth.
Exactly. Fix the state by grounding it in eternal truth. Fix the individual soul by aligning it with that transcendent order. It's about finding stability by looking beyond the changeable world.
And Stoicism arose during the Hellenistic period, which was also pretty chaotic after Alexander the Great's empire fragmented.
Precisely. It was a time of collapsing empires, shifting powers, widespread uncertainty and anxiety for individuals. The Stoic response is arguably more micro, more psychological. It's about retreating to the inner citadel.
The inner citadel.
Yes. The idea is, since the external world is chaotic, unpredictable, and largely beyond your control, you achieve individual invulnerability, peace, apatheia, by mastering the one thing you can control, your internal world, your judgments about those external events, recognizing them as indifferent. It offered, you could say, technologies of the self for psychological survival in a very difficult world.
So if Plato wanted to rebuild the world from a divine blueprint,
Stoicism aimed to build an unbreachable fortress within the individual, a different strategy for dealing with chaos.
and Stoicism is really notable, isn't it, for its attempt to create such a tightly unified, integrated system connecting logic, physics, and ethics.
That integration is one of his most defining and impressive features. They weren't seen as separate academic subjects. Logic gives you the method for clear thinking. Physics isn't just studying rocks and stars. It's studying the rational order of the universe, the logos, which is their theology.
And knowing physics is necessary for ethics.
Absolutely. Because living the good life means living according to nature, according to the logos. You can only do that if you understand through physics what that rational structure is. So the whole purpose of studying logic and physics is ultimately ethical, to enable you to live in harmony with the world's rational structure. The Stoics really saw God, or the Logos, as the universe's operating system, not a personified being to be worshipped through myth or ritual in the traditional sense, but a rational order to be understood and lived in accordance with. It's a very rationalist approach compared to faith-based systems.
These Greek philosophies, they really wrestled with how to find order and meaning in a chaotic world, didn't they? Thinking about that Stoic idea that virtue is the only good, What does that truly imply about our priorities? And how might that intense focus on what's within our control be relevant for us today?
Well, the idea that your happiness, your fundamental worth as a person, is completely untouchable by external fortune, whether you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or criticized, even facing death. That's such a radical assertion of inner freedom, isn't it? In a world that often makes us feel powerless against huge external forces, the stoic insistence that your moral character, your choices, your judgments are the only things that truly matter. It feels incredibly powerful and maybe quite relevant.
Okay, moving south from Greece now, let's enter the ancient wisdom of the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt. This feels like a very different kind of tradition again.
It really is. Ancient Egypt had this incredibly complex worldview, rooted in polytheism, magic, intricate rituals, all deeply interwoven with the rhythms of the Nile River itself. And that provided a remarkably stable cultural and spiritual framework for something like 3 millennia.
3,000 years. That's staggering. And unlike the more abstract philosophical quests we saw in Greece, Egyptian wisdom seems fundamentally practical.
Practical is a great word for it. It was focused on tangible goals, maintaining cosmic order, legitimizing the rule of the pharaohs, and crucially, preparing individuals for the afterlife journey.
Not so much abstract speculation for its own sake.
Less so. The focus was on making things work, keeping the world running smoothly, ensuring a successful transition after death.
The pantheon was vast and fluid, you mentioned, around 1,500 deities.
Yes, an enormous number are known. These deities were seen as immanent forces, active within the world and nature, in society, in cosmic functions. Their depictions, often as humans with animal heads or hybrid forms, were highly symbolic.
Symbolic of their characteristics or power, not literal portraits.
Exactly. Their true natures were often considered mysterious, beyond full human comprehension. So Anubis with the jackal head wasn't just a dog god. The jackal's association with scavenging in cemeteries symbolized his role in protecting the dead from decay and guiding them.
And there was a lot of syncretism, gods merging, like Amun and Ra becoming Amun-Ra.
Very common. As political centers shifted, local gods might merge with state gods. And you also had important family groupings, like the core triad of Osiris, god of the underworld, his wife Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, and their son Horus, god of kingship in the sky.
But the central concept, the absolute linchpin underlying everything, was Ma'at.
Ma'at, yes. This single term is incredibly rich and hard to translate perfectly. It encompasses truth, justice, balance, order, harmony, cosmic law. Essentially the fundamental, fixed, eternal principle of order that was established by the gods at the moment of creation.
And without its active maintenance, the world would collapse into Isfet chaos.
Precisely. Preserving Ma'at was the absolute primary goal of both religion and society as a whole. On a cosmic level, this meant sustaining the gods through ritual and offerings, so they had the power to perform their functions, ensuring the sun rose every day, the Nile flooded predictably, basically holding the forces of chaos, Isfet, at bay.
And on the human level,
It meant living a life of integrity, honesty, cooperation, fairness, contributing to the social order, which was seen as a reflection of the cosmic order.
the pharaoh was positioned right at the very center of all this, seen as divine, the key intermediary.
Absolutely central. The pharaoh was considered a living god on earth, the embodiment of Horus, the son of the sun god Ra. His most critical religious and political duty was to uphold Ma'at,
How did he do that?
both by ensuring justice and harmony within Egyptian society, and perhaps even more importantly in their view, by maintaining the cults of the gods, building temples, ensuring the correct rituals were performed, providing offerings. Ceremonies like the Sed festival were specifically designed to ritually rejuvenate the pharaoh's divine power, thereby strengthening Ma'at.
Now, a very profound belief was in the journey beyond death. Our sources describe it as seeming very tangible, but also full of perils.
It was seen almost as a continuation of life, but a difficult and dangerous one that required extensive preparation. Earthly life was viewed, in large part, as preparation for this next stage. That's why you see such immense effort and resources poured into building elaborate tombs, providing extensive grave goods, and, of course, perfecting the techniques of mummification.
Why was mummification so vital?
They believed the individual had several spiritual components, notably the Ka, the life force or spiritual double, and the Ba, the personality or soul, often depicted as a human-headed bird. These separated at death. The goal was for the Khan Ba to be able to reunite with the preserved body, allowing the deceased to become an Ak, a glorified, effective spirit capable of navigating the afterlife and dwelling among the gods.
So the mummy was the anchor for the soul components.
Essentially, yes. Without the preserved body, The soul risked dissolution. And then you had the funerary texts, like the famous Book of the Dead, whose actual Egyptian name was closer to the Book of Coming Forth by Day.
These are like guidebooks.
Exactly. Magical guidebooks or even toolkits. They contain spells, hymns, prayers, and passwords needed to navigate the complex and dangerous underworld, the duat. To overcome demons, pass through guarded gates, answer the challenging questions of the gods encountered along the way.
All leading up to the climax, the weighing of the heart ceremony.
The ultimate judgment. In the Great Hall of Judgment, presided over by Osiris, the deceased's heart, seen as the seat of intellect, memory, and conscience, was weighed on a giant scale against the feather of Maat.
The feather representing truth and order.
Right. If the heart was heavy, weighed down by sin, injustice, a life lived against Maat, it was devoured by the terrifying creature Emmet, part crocodile, lion, hippo, resulting in a dreaded second death, complete oblivion.
But if it was light,
If the heart balanced with the feather, it meant the person had lived a life in accordance with Maat. They were declared true of voice, deemed worthy, and granted entry into the blissful afterlife, the field of reeds, to dwell with Osiris and the gods.
so thinking comparatively, a key characteristic differentiating Egyptian wisdom seems to be this intense focus on collective, cosmic maintenance preserving Ma'at versus, say, the individual salvation or liberation sought in some other traditions we've discussed.
That's a really core insight, yes. While individual survival in the afterlife was hugely important, the overarching goal of the entire religious system was the ongoing collective effort to preserve Maat and hold back Isfet for the good of the entire cosmos, including the gods themselves.
It was about sustaining the gods so they could maintain the universe.
Exactly. It was seen as a reciprocal, functional relationship. Humans performed the rituals and provided the offerings that sustained the gods' power. The gods, in turn, used that power to keep the fragile cosmic order running and prevent chaos from overwhelming creation. Their religion was intensely practical, active work against chaos.
And the individual's afterlife journey itself is framed by this need to uphold Ma'at.
Completely. The Book of the Dead isn't just about personal survival. It's a toolkit for navigating a universe where chaos is a constant threat, and passing the judgment proves you played your part in upholding order. The entire elaborate apparatus, from the massive state temples down to the spells written on papyrus, was arguably a technology for cosmic stability. Human life was participation in this grand project, with the pharaoh as the chief engineer ensuring Maat prevailed.
Our sources also take care to correct a common historical misinterpretation about Egyptian religion, this idea of simple animal worship.
Yes, that's a very simplistic and largely inaccurate notion that became popular, especially in Greco-Roman times and later. Egyptian religion actually involved a highly sophisticated symbolic theology.
So depicting deities with animal forms wasn't literal worship of the animal itself.
No, it was about recognizing and revering the animal's perceived connection to a specific divine power or characteristic. The animal form was seen as a potent symbol, perhaps even a potential vessel for the god's power ka to manifest on earth, but not the god itself in its totality.
Like the sacred Apis bull in Memphis being seen as an earthly manifestation of the Ka, of the creator god Ta.
Exactly. It was a way to make abstract divine concepts relatable, visible, tangible through observation of the natural world, which they saw as being infused with divine power. It wasn't primitive zoology. It was complex theology expressed visually.
And that infamous curse of Tutankhamun, that's another modern myth.
Absolutely. Purely a product of sensationalist media reporting following the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s. There's no ancient curse mentioned in the tomb texts or inscriptions. It's a modern invention, plain and simple. Correcting these kinds of popular misconceptions is really important for getting a more accurate understanding of ancient Egyptian beliefs.
Okay, so how does this Egyptian focus on actively maintaining cosmic order through Ma'at feel different from traditions seeking individual liberation from the world or finding harmony within it, like Taoism? And what does it tell us about their worldview, that their religion was so fundamentally practical, so focused on making things work?
The practicality is really striking, isn't it? While some traditions might see the material world or the cycle of existence as something problematic, something to escape or transcend, the ancient Egyptians seem to have been intensely focused on preserving and actively working within this world, this cosmic structure, to keep a fragile, precious order from being constantly threatened and potentially swallowed by chaos. It grounds their entire spiritual effort not just in personal salvation after death, but in a constant collective, active struggle for cosmic stability now.
Okay, from the ancient Mediterranean and the Nile Valley, let's turn now to indigenous wisdom traditions, starting with Aboriginal Australia.
Right. Now, it's crucial to remember the vast diversity of indigenous cultures globally, but often we find shared underlying principles. Things like a profound connection to the land, knowledge transmitted primarily through oral tradition, and a strong sense that the physical and spiritual realms aren't separate, but inextricably linked. In Aboriginal Australia, the foundational concept encompassing all this is usually translated as the dreaming, or dream time.
Which our sources emphasize as much more than just myths about the past. It's described as a complex, living framework for reality itself, for law, for identity.
Yes, it's a concept often profoundly misunderstood by outsiders. It refers, on one level, to a cosmological epoch of creation, a time when powerful ancestral beings, often taking forms that were simultaneously human, animal, or even plant-like, journeyed across a previously featureless land.
And through their actions, their travels, their songs, their fights, their loves, they literally shaped the physical landscape we see today.
Exactly. They created the mountains, the rivers, the water holes, the rock formations. They also created the plants, the animals, and crucially, the first human beings, often assigning them specific languages, social groups, and territories.
But the critical point seems to be that the dreaming isn't confined to some distant past. It's not over.
Crucially, no. This is where Western linear concepts of time break down. The dreaming is considered eternal, ongoing. It unifies past, present, and future into a single, ever-present reality. It's sometimes described as a beginning that never ended. The creative power of those ancestors is believed to remain immanent, potent, and active in the world today.
And the ancestral beings themselves, after their journeys, didn't just disappear, they transformed.
They transformed into features of the land, that specific rock formation, that water hole which becomes sacred sites, or they might have gone up into the sky to become celestial bodies. The landscape itself is the physical manifestation of the dreaming, the enduring, visible proof of the ancestors' journeys and ongoing presence.
And during their journeys, they also laid down the law. What does that encompass?
The law is another foundational concept. It refers to the immutable, comprehensive blueprint for life that the ancestors established. It dictates everything: social structures, kinship systems, economic practices, moral principles, and very importantly, ceremonial life. The fundamental human mission, in this worldview, is to live in accordance with this ancestral legacy, to uphold the law and thereby ensure the continued order and reproduction of the world.
Totemic systems seem to be really key in mediating the connection between people, the law, and the land itself.
They are absolutely central. Totemism establishes specific kinship links between individuals, family groups, or clans, and particular ancestral beings, the plant or animal species associated with them, their totems, and the specific sacred sites created by those ancestors.
So it connects humanity and nature into a single whole.
Yes, a single corporate whole, bound by shared ancestry and mutual obligation. When someone says, for instance, kangaroo is my brother, it's often not just a metaphor. It can signify a literal kinship tie, tracing their lineage back to the same kangaroo ancestor as the animal itself, carrying specific responsibilities towards both the species and the related sacred sites.
And the land itself, country, isn't just physical space or property. It's sacred.
Profoundly sacred. It's not seen as a commodity to be owned or exploited. It's the repository of ancestral power, of life force, sometimes called guruwari. Spirit is believed to return to the land at death and emerge from specific sites at birth. Connection to one's ancestral country is therefore not just about belonging, it's an existential necessity, the very source of one's life force, identity, law, and spiritual sustenance.
Spiritual practice, then, sounds very active and embodied. Ceremony, song, dance, art.
Very much so. These aren't just symbolic representations. They are seen as vital reenactments of the dreaming events. By performing the ceremonies correctly, singing the songs, dancing the dances, creating the art, people maintain their connection to the ancestors, renew the spiritual potency of the land, and reactivate the life force necessary for the continuation of all life.
Corroboree are important ceremonial gatherings.
Yes, corroboree can refer to a range of ceremonial gatherings, both sacred and secular. Importantly, men's and women's ceremonial lives are often distinct, with specific rituals, songs, dances, and sacred objects associated with each, like the intricate Owalai body paint designs for women's ceremonies in Central Australia. Both are vital for maintaining different aspects of the law and the dreaming.
And knowledge itself is mapped and transmitted through things like song lines. That sounds fascinating.
They are incredible. Song lines, sometimes called dreaming tracks, are essentially oral maps. They follow the routes taken by the ancestral beings during the dreaming. The verses of the songs encode detailed knowledge about the geography, the location of water sources and resources, the history of the ancestors' actions at specific sites, and the relevant laws associated with that country.
So singing the song is like traveling the land and accessing its knowledge.
Exactly. It links individuals and communities across vast distances, connecting them to shared stories, laws, and sacred sites along the ancestors' routes.
Rituals also mark significant life stages or seasonal cycles.
Yes, important rituals punctuate the life cycle initiation ceremonies, like the Bora in some regions, mark the transition to adulthood, and impart crucial knowledge of the law. Mortuary rites, like the elaborate Pukamani ceremonies of the Tili Islands, ensure the spirit transitions correctly. And seasonal gatherings, like the Great Bunyanut Feasts in southeast Queensland, reinforce social bonds and connections to the land's cycles.
So the really unique cosmology here is this idea of perpetual presence, not a creation event that happened in the past.
That's perhaps the most fundamental difference from many Western or linear conceptions of time and creation. The dreaming isn't over. It is the living reality of the land around you right now. Rituals aren't just commemorating past events. They are actively recreating, re-energizing, keeping the life force potent and flowing. The landscape is the living embodiment of the ancestors. It's not about faith in something that happened long ago. It's about direct, continuous interaction with an imminent, ever-present sacred reality. Connection to country is an existential necessity for participating in this ongoing cosmic maintenance.
And the law, the ethics, aren't abstract codes written down in books. They're literally read from the landscape itself.
That's beautifully put, yes. The ancestors, in their very acts of creation, shaped the physical features and laid down the laws governing them simultaneously. Sacred sites are physical imprints of the law. Songlines are the pathways for transmitting that law, encoded in stories and songs inextricably tied to specific geographical locations. Totemism binds clans to specific sites and gives them responsibilities for caring for that land, its species, and upholding the associated laws. It's a kind of geographically grounded ecological jurisprudence.
Which means being removed from your country.
Is catastrophic. It's not just losing your home in a physical sense. It's being severed from the source of your law, your identity, your kinship network, your spiritual power, your very reason for being.
Wow. How does that Aboriginal concept of the dreaming, where time is nonlinear and the land is literally alive with ancestral presence, how does that challenge our typical Western understanding of history or environment? And just imagine living in a world where the rules you live by, the ethics, are actually embedded in the mountains and rivers around you. What would that feel like?
It fundamentally challenges our separation of past, present, and future, doesn't it? And our common view of the environment as something separate from us, as a resource or just a backdrop to human history. To live within the dreaming perspective is to exist within a landscape that is perpetually alive with meaning, agency, law, and your own deepest ancestral history. It transforms the very ground under your feet into a sacred text, a living relative, a constant source of guidance and responsibility.
Moving from Australia now to the Americas. Again, immense diversity across Indigenous cultures here, but the sources suggest some shared threads, too.
Yes, absolutely. While the specific cultures, languages, and practices vary incredibly across North, Central, and South America, scholars often point to some recurring underlying principles. Things like a sense of an all-pervading spiritual power or life force, the inherent sacredness of nature, and an ethical emphasis on kinship, balance, and reciprocity in all relationships.
Animism seems to be a common belief structure in many cultures, the idea that all elements of the universe, not just humans and animals, but plants, rocks, rivers, weather phenomena, have spirit or soul, are alive and sentient.
That's a very common thread, yes. There's often not that sharp division we tend to make between the natural and the supernatural. It's perceived more as a single, integrated reality, alive with spirit and power. And related to this, concepts of a great spirit or master spirit are also widespread, particularly in North America.
An all-powerful creative force, maybe, though perhaps understood less as an anthropomorphic deity sitting outside the world and more as an immanent power within it.
Often, yes. Terms like Wakantanka among the Lakota, often translated as Great Mystery, or Gitchmanatu among Algonquian-speaking peoples, frequently point to a pervasive, mysterious sacred power that animates all of existence, rather than necessarily a personified creator figure in the way Western religions might conceive of God. It's sometimes described simply as a power.
And creation narratives are incredibly varied, passed down orally.
Hugely varied. You have stories featuring powerful animal creators or transformers like Coyote or Raven who shape the world and sometimes trick humans. You have complex emergence stories, particularly common in the Southwest among peoples like the Hopi and Navajo, where ancestors journeyed through multiple underworlds before emerging into the present world. These rich oral traditions carry history, cosmology, and law.
A core ethical principle that seems to come up again and again is this idea of kinship, viewing the entire living universe as a community of relatives.
This is absolutely fundamental to many indigenous worldviews. If the universe is alive and imbued with spirit, then all beings, humans, animals, plants, even rocks and rivers, are part of an extended family. Seeing nature not as a collection of resources to be exploited, but as a community of relatives, our brothers, our sisters, all my relations, naturally fosters an ethic of deep respect, harmony, responsibility, and non-interference with both human and non-human beings.
And the ideal state is often described in terms of balance and harmony, like the Navajo concept of Hozo.
Yes, Hozo is a central concept in Navajo Dine philosophy. It means much more than just beauty. It encompasses a state of balance, harmony, health, and rightness in all aspects of life, individual, social, and cosmic. It's something actively maintained through right living and ceremony. Similarly, the Hopi concept of Hopivatsquani emphasizes peace, cooperation, humility, and respect as the path, the way of life necessary for communal and cosmic well-being.
Gratitude also seems to be a really strong recurring theme.
Overwhelmingly so. Prayers, songs, ceremonies frequently emphasize giving thanks for life, for the gifts of the Creator or the spirits, for the earth providing sustenance, for the plants and animals offering themselves. It reflects a profound stance of humility, interdependence, and appreciation, contrasting sharply with a more human-centered or purely utility-driven view of the natural world.
Ceremonial life isn't seen as something separate from everyday life, is it? It seems fully integrated into the community and its rhythms.
Very much so. It's not usually confined to a specific day of the week or a separate religious domain. Major ceremonies are often vital communal undertakings, essential for renewing spiritual connections, reinforcing community bonds, reaffirming relationships with the spirit world, and helping to maintain cosmic balance and ensure the continuation of life.
Examples like the sun dance among Plains tribes.
The sun dance is a powerful example, a demanding ceremony often involving fasting, dancing, prayer, and sometimes significant personal sacrifice, all undertaken for the renewal and well-being of the community and the world.
Or the green corn ceremony in the southeastern woodlands.
Another crucial one, a major harvest renewal and purification ceremony that traditionally brought dispersed communities together, marked the new year, and involved rituals of forgiveness and communal solidarity. Practices like sweat lodges are also widespread across many cultures, used for spiritual purification, healing, and prayer.
And personal practices like the vision quest are also significant for individuals.
Yes, the vision quest, or similar solitary retreats, often involving fasting and isolation in nature, is a common practice, particularly as a rite of passage for young people, or for anyone seeking guidance, purpose, or a direct connection with guardian spirits.
Spiritual leaders, often called shamans or medicine people, play crucial roles in many of these societies.
They do. They're often healers, mediators between the human world and the spirit world, keepers of sacred knowledge. They possess specialized understanding of rituals, plant medicines, songs, and stories, and may use techniques like drumming, chanting, or trance states to access spiritual realms for healing, divination, or guidance for the community.
So the essence of many of these traditions, it sounds like, is less about believing a specific set of doctrines and more about living and maintaining a complex web of relationships.
That seems to be a key takeaway. The focus often appears to be less on theological correctness or adherence to fixed dogma, and more on practice, direct experience, and maintaining respectful, reciprocal kinship with all beings and forces in the universe, human, non-human, and spiritual.
Knowledge transmitted orally through stories, often unexplained.
Yes, knowledge carried in stories, myths, allegories, often rich with multiple layers of meaning and sometimes deliberately left unexplained to respect the mystery inherent in the cosmos. The ethical framework is deeply relational, grounded in principles of kinship, harmony, reciprocity, balance, and respect. The common phrase, all my relations, beautifully encapsulates this holistic worldview.
Ceremonies are about renewing community and cosmos. Health is seen as harmony in relationships. It feels less like a conventional religion in the Western sense, and more like a deeply integrated way of life.
Exactly. Often very pragmatic and relational. Truth isn't primarily sought in abstract propositions or sacred texts, but found in the lived experience of balance, harmony, and right relationship within the larger web of existence.
And interestingly, despite the emphasis on many spirits of animals, places, ancestors, our sources suggest there's often an underlying concept of a single life force or ultimate power. It's not just simple polytheism or animism.
That's an important nuance, yes. While acknowledging a world full of spirits and powers, many traditions seem to possess an underlying sense of a single unifying life force or ultimate spiritual reality that permeates everything. It suggests a more sophisticated non-dualism, or perhaps pantheism, seeing the divine in everything, or panentheism, seeing the divine in and beyond everything.
So the supernatural world of spirits is often seen as paired with or emanating from this great spirit or ultimate power.
It often seems that way. Concepts like Teotl among the pre-Columbian Aztec, which scholars interpret as a single dynamic sacred force underlying all reality, or Kamaquin among the Incan, a unifying spirit or life force animating beings. These point towards something more complex than simple polytheism. It suggests that early European observers, quick to label these traditions as just animism or polytheism, likely missed this deeper, often non-dualistic cosmological understanding, where the many spirits are manifestations or aspects of a single immanent sacred power.
So, thinking about that phrase, all my relations, what does it truly signify in this context? And how might adopting that kind of perspective change how we view our connection to the world around us? And how is this emphasis on lived relationships fundamentally different from, say, seeking abstract knowledge, like in some philosophical traditions?
All my relations is such a profound declaration, isn't it?
Mm.
It signifies acknowledging that every being, every element of the universe, human, animal, plant, rock, river, wind, is part of your extended family, interconnected, interdependent, and deserving of respect, consideration, and reciprocal care. Adopting that perspective fundamentally shifts you from being an observer or exploiter of the world to being a participant, a relative within it. And the emphasis on lived relationships means knowledge isn't just something abstract you possess about the world, it's something enacted in the world through ethical engagement, direct experience, and maintaining balance with all your kin. It's embodied wisdom, not just intellectual understanding.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground here, haven't we? Really diving into the deep wisdom traditions of India, China, Greece, Egypt, Australia, and the Americas.
It's a truly rich and diverse tapestry, isn't it? Seeing how different cultures, across vast stretches of time and geography, have grappled with the fundamental questions of existence. What is real? How should we live? What is our purpose?
The sources we explored really did offer a powerful shortcut, I think, to understanding these foundational ideas about reality, ethics, purpose. We've seen how different traditions approach these universal questions using remarkably distinct frameworks.
Absolutely. From the intricate textual and ritual traditions of India to the social and natural harmony sought in China, the rational inquiries of Greece, the cosmic maintenance project of Egypt, and the profound oral traditions and deep land connections of indigenous peoples. The diversity of approach is stunning.
Looking across all these traditions, some patterns definitely start to emerge, don't they? Particularly around where they locate ultimate reality or the goal of life.
Yes, you can see a kind of spectrum, perhaps. Some traditions, like Platonism with its longing for the transcendent realm of forms, or the Sramana paths in India Buddhism and Jainism aiming for moksha or nirvana, liberation from the cycle of samsara, they tend to emphasize achieving ultimate reality or fulfillment by transcending, escaping, or being released from the limitations of the material world or the cycle of existence.
While others seem to find the sacred and the path to fulfillment right here within this world.
Exactly. Think of indigenous traditions like the Aboriginal Australian dreaming, where the sacred is the living land itself, perpetually present. Or Taoism, with its focus on aligning with the immanent Tao flowing through the natural world. Stoicism, too, is about finding virtue and peace by living in accordance with the rational order of this cosmos. Even Egyptian religion, with its intense focus on maintaining Ma'at, is profoundly concerned with preserving order in this world, albeit a fragile one constantly threatened by chaos.
So whether the ultimate goal is out there or right here really shapes everything else.
It deeply shapes what they identify as the core problem of existence. Is it ignorance of the forms? Is it suffering caused by craving? Is it the threat of cosmic chaos? Is it being disconnected from the land and the law, and therefore what solutions they propose? Liberation, harmony, order, alignment.
It's also remarkable how many of these ancient ideas still resonate or reappear, sometimes in surprising ways in our modern world.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The wisdom embedded in Taoism and many indigenous traditions, with their emphasis on harmony with nature, kinship with all beings, ecological awareness, and sustainable practices like cultural burning. These offer powerful critiques of modern environmental exploitation and potential models for alternative, more reciprocal relationships with the planet.
Jain Ahimsa has obvious relevance to contemporary discussions about animal rights, vegetarianism, veganism, even anti-consumerism through the principle of aparigraha, non-attachment.
And even within the Vedic tradition, you find ancient injunctions about respecting nature, seeing the world as one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that feel very relevant today.
Then there's the impact on psychology and well-being. Buddhist mindfulness is probably the most obvious example.
Absolutely. Secularized mindfulness practices, derived from Buddhist meditation, are now central components of clinical interventions, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, used widely for managing stress, anxiety, depression, and chronic pain.
And Stoicism's influence on modern therapy.
Huge. Stoic philosophy, particularly its emphasis on identifying and managing our judgments and focusing on what's within our control, provides a direct philosophical foundation for cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, one of the most widely practiced forms of psychotherapy today. The focus on building resilience and inner peace through rational self-management is pure Stoicism.
Even Platonic psychology, with its tripartite soul, can be seen as an early precursor to understanding internal conflict. And the Socratic method of questioning is still a core therapeutic technique.
Definitely. And in the realm of social and political thought, Confucian ideas about relational ethics, social harmony, and the role of virtue in governance continue to be debated and adapted in East Asia and beyond. Egyptian concepts of Maat are seen by some historians as important antecedents to later Western ideas about justice, cosmic law, and the rule of law.
And there's interesting scholarship, isn't there, about how indigenous governance structures like the Iroquois Confederacy's Great Law of Peace may have influenced the thinking of figures like Benjamin Franklin and the framing of the U.S. Constitution.
Yes, the extent of that influence is debated by historians, but the parallels and potential connections are certainly explored.
But this whole trend of secularizing practices, taking techniques like mindfulness meditation or stoic resilience exercises or even yoga postures out of their original rich spiritual or cosmological contexts, it raises questions, doesn't it?
It's definitely a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it makes these potentially beneficial techniques accessible to a much wider audience, allowing people to use them for practical benefits like stress reduction or emotional regulation without needing to adopt the entire original worldview. That accessibility is positive.
But the downside?
The risk is superficiality, reductionism, even commodification. When you strip away the deeper ethical, philosophical, or spiritual framework, the understanding of suffering in Buddhism, the cosmology of the logos in Stoicism, the goal of union in yoga, you might lose the potential for deeper, more transformative meaning. The critique of the modern mindfulness industry, for example, often centers on this concern, that it becomes just another self-help tool, detached from its ethical roots and potentially even used to help people cope with unjust systems rather than changing them.
And as we explore and appreciate these traditions, it's also vital, isn't it, to look at the critical perspectives, the challenges, the shadows that exist within them, both historically and perhaps today.
Absolutely essential. No tradition is perfect, and every single one, despite its profound ideals, has faced complex issues and criticisms when manifested in human history and institutions. Our sources point to concerns about inherent hierarchy, caste systems, and gender bias in traditions like Vedic Hinduism, the historical realities of the caste system, practices like sati, widow immolation, though rare and contested, for example.
Confucianism, too, with its strong emphasis on hierarchy and traditional gender roles.
Yes, Confucianism is being criticized, particularly in modern times, for reinforcing patriarchal structures, summed up in concepts like the three obediences expected of women to father, husband, son. Aspects of Jainism have also drawn scrutiny, like the traditional Digambara view on women's inability to achieve liberation directly, or contemporary concerns in some communities about Bal Diksha, the initiation of children into monastic life.
Some philosophical ideas themselves also face critiques, perhaps of being too abstract or potentially leading to passivity.
That charge is sometimes leveled. Platonism, with its sharp dualism between the perfect forms and the imperfect material world, has been criticized for potentially devaluing the physical world, the body, and practical life. Taoist Wu Wei, That principle of effortless action, while profound, can sometimes be interpreted or misused as promoting quietism, a kind of passive acceptance that might discourage necessary action in the face of social injustice or ecological crises.
And with indigenous traditions, there's a real need to move beyond romanticism.
Critically important. Romanticizing indigenous cultures through stereotypes like the noble savage or the ecological Indian is deeply problematic. It often reflects an escapist fantasy for outsiders, denies the full complexity and humanity of indigenous peoples, including their own internal conflicts and historical changes, and can inadvertently freeze them in time, silencing contemporary indigenous voices and struggles by portraying them solely as figures of an idealized, unchanging past or as simply anti-modern.
And finally, just constantly correcting those historical misinterpretations we talked about, like with Egypt.
Yes. Understanding that Egyptian animal worship was actually sophisticated symbolic theology, or that the curse of Tutankhamun was a modern media invention. These aren't just academic quibbles. They fundamentally reshape our understanding and appreciation of these ancient peoples and their complex beliefs. Getting the facts right matters.
Looking across all these criticisms, what seems to be a unifying theme, perhaps, is the persistent gap that can exist between a tradition's highest philosophical ideals and its actual historical institutional manifestations.
That's a very insightful point. You see this tension everywhere. The ideal of universal compassion in Buddhism versus historical instances of political entanglement or violence involving Buddhist institutions. The profound monistic philosophy of the Upanishads versus the rigid social realities of the caste system justified by later interpretations. The ideal of Confucian Ren versus entrenched patriarchal hierarchies. Even Plato's ideal of the philosopher king in the Republic has been criticized as potentially justifying totalitarianism.
So, any system, when put into practice by fallible human beings and institutions,
Is prone to distortion, bias, rigidity, and simply failing to live up to its own highest principles. Critiques often highlight precisely this failure to realize the ideal in practice. It underscores that crucial distinction between the philosophy or the core teachings and the complex, messy reality of religion as practiced throughout history.
it really is incredible, though, how these ancient ideas continue to pop up and influence modern thought, whether it's in therapy, environmental movements, or ethics. But it does leave us with that question. When we extract these practices from their original spiritual soil, are we losing something essential? And looking at the complexities and criticisms, what do they teach us about the inherent, maybe unavoidable challenges of trying to live by profound ideals in the messy reality of the human world?
I think they teach us that humility is important, that critical self-reflection is necessary for any tradition, ancient or modern, to remain vibrant and avoid stagnation or corruption. And perhaps they teach us that the struggle itself, the tension between the ideal and the real, is a fundamental, maybe even necessary part of the human spiritual and ethical journey across all cultures.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground today, diving deep into this incredible wisdom from India, China, Greece, Egypt, Australia, and the Americas.
It's been quite an exploration. The sources we looked at really did offer us a valuable shortcut, I feel, to understanding some of the most foundational ideas humanity has developed about reality, ethics, and the ultimate purpose of life.
Yeah, seeing how these diverse traditions grappled with those universal human questions using such distinct frameworks, sacred texts, complex rituals, rational argument, profound oral traditions, deep connections to the living land, it's quite something.
The sheer variety of human spiritual and philosophical expression is remarkable.
So this deep dive, we hope it's given you, our listeners, some fresh insights, helped you make some new connections, maybe sparked a few aha moments as you think about this vast and diverse tapestry of human thought across millennia.
Reflecting on these different paths, these different answers to life's big questions, can certainly offer new perspectives on our own lives and the assumptions we hold.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. If some of the deepest wisdom traditions we explored seek liberation from the world, aiming to transcend it, while others find meaning, fulfillment, and the sacred within a living, interconnected world, what does that fundamental difference in orientation tell us about our own potential places in the cosmos? And how can we learn to appreciate the profound wisdom potentially present in both of those approaches, the path of transcendence and the path of immanence, even as we remain critically aware of their historical complexities and the baggage they might carry?
That's a great question. Definitely something for you to continue mulling over, exploring on your own learning journey.